everyone, welcome to the March 12th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon. I'll be joined in just a moment by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. Getting this podcast out a day early this week. We typically record on Fridays. This one's coming out on Thursday as we talk about the Saturday action. This week we'll be focusing on Oaklawn Park and Santa Anita. That's where most of the racing world's eyes will be trained this weekend, with that Derby prep taking place at Oaklawn, that being the Grade 2 Rebel, the third in their series of Derby preps leading up to the fourth, that Arkansas Derby, their final prep for the Kentucky Derby. These two, the Southwest and the Rebel, are not featuring any horses running back from the prior race because that whole schedule got condensed with the unexpected weather they had in the Oaklawn area, but it's still a good card on Saturday at Oaklawn Park. 5 stakes in total. We're going to talk about all of those stakes races, starting with the Azaria small field of fillies and mares, leading on to the Essex, the Temperance Hill, the Hot Springs, culminating with the Rebel, the 11th race on that card. Then we'll move over to Santa Anita, where they're running 2 graded stakes races on Saturday. First of those is the Grade 3 San Simeon for the turf sprinters. The feature, though, is the Grade 1 Beholder Mile, which does feature the 4-year-old debut of last year's 3-year-old filly champion, Swiss Skydiver. So a lot of people looking forward to her kicking off her 4-year-old campaign. Craig, a lot of great racing to talk about this week and some pretty good cards at Oaklawn and Santa Anita.
Yeah, it is. And I did want to mention the reason I asked you to record early is because I'm trying, looks like we're going to the Rebel. So I should be on site for Saturday's racing. I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully the weather holds up. The forecast has improved quite a bit from what it looked like a week ago, but plan to leave sometime tomorrow, so it was a little easier to record today. So wish me well on that end. But as far as the racing goes, it's a really good card. The Rebel, I don't think, is quite what we usually see from a race of that quality, but that has something to do, I think, with the schedule, with the Southwest being so close, and some of the horses ran in there that we'd see in the Rebel. But I imagine we're going to see a convergence of the 2 races in the Arkansas Derby in about 3 weeks.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would imagine it would make the Arkansas Derby a more interesting race because you don't have a lot of these horses having faced each other yet. But yeah, no runbacks from the Southwest here, and I'm sure it'll be fun to see a lot of these horses on Saturday because in addition to those running in the Rebel, there are some very talented horses running on the undercard, and we're going to get right into it with race 5 on Oaklawn Saturday card. That's the Grade 2 Azaria going 1 mile and a 16th for the fillies and mares. It's just a 6-horse field, but a very talented group of runners. You've got 3, arguably even 4 major contenders in this race. I think you have to start the conversation with the number 5, She Dares the Devil, one of 2 going out for the Brad Cox Bard. I would imagine she's going to be the favorite in this race based on her strong 3-year-old season that she had last year. She was the winner of the Kentucky Oaks, beating out Swiss Skydiver as well as Gamine in that spot. She did disappoint when last seen in the Spinster Stakes, but turns out that was a pretty strong field that she met in there, and this is the right kind of spot to begin her 4-year-old campaign.
Yeah, I would agree. Just a field of 5. She draws a good post in here. I think she has a good running style with a horse like Latruska entered. I think she can sit right off of her. And as a speed figure guy, she just has a pretty good edge on the rest of this field. Latruska's one who has run some nice speed figures in the upper teens mostly. But I also think she's had things her own way. She hasn't faced this kind of quality that we're going to see here. So for me, I'm going to go with She Dares the Devil. I think she's going to be really tough to beat. I guess we should talk about Invitante. She ran a good race to close out her season at Churchill, winning the Falls City against older horses. Now she's a 4-year-old, but I don't think that race was as strong as some of the others have been facing running in. It was a Grade 2, but it was a race where she did get a 119 speed figure, but it was one that was adjusted up because of a slow pace that day, a pace that she surely benefited from as she established a clear early lead, and she's just facing a ton more speed than what we've seen before. Now, I'm not saying she is a need to lead speed horse because she's obviously run off the pace in many of her races, but her best one was up front, and I think she would need to run her best here, and that could be problematic with Latruska. Even She Dares the Devil has high tactical speed, and Motion Emotions one who's always right up there as well. So not the greatest betting race in my opinion, but if you are going to bet it, I would try to zero in on one horse and maybe dismiss another. And for me, it's She Dares the Devil that I like, and Votante, who I don't really care for.
Yeah, we have a similar take on those two favorites on the morning line. I strongly prefer She Dares the Devil to En Voutante for all the reasons that you articulated. I just think En Voutante got an absolutely perfect trip last time. Paceless race. Nobody else challenged her on the front end. Not that she's a need the lead type. She's comfortable coming from off the pace, but she was able to run a career best figure based on getting that great trip last time. And I don't think she's actually 6 lengths better than Bonnie South, who she defeated in the Fall City. I just think that's the way that race played out. So with her typical trip from off the pace here, I don't think we're going to see her put forth another speed figure like that. And She Dares the Devil, as you said, just has figs from last year that make her way the horse to beat. If she gets back to that Kentucky Oaks performance, I think everybody else is running for second. And while some might say that she disappointed in the Spinster, remember that a lot of people at the time were saying that that October 4th track at Keeneland was a day where you really didn't want to be down on the rail, and that's where she was for a good portion of that race. Horses making some outside moves in there. So I think she ran fine in that spot, and I would expect that she could rebound here. To me, her biggest competition is likely to come from Latruska, who I would not dismiss in this race. And if the prices diverge a bit and She Dares the Devil gets bet down to more on the 6-5, 7-5 range, and we get around 3-1 or 7-2 on Latruska, I would go for Latruska in this race because I know that she's coming in a little bit light on recent speed figures, maybe compared to She Dares the Devil. In Latruska's past, she has the capability of running speed figures around 120. She got a 121 when she won the Shuvi last year. And I really like what they've done with Latruska in her last couple of starts, taking off the blinkers. It's allowed her to relax on the front end and finish much stronger. I really liked the way that she closed out the end of that Houston Ladies Classic last time, running away from that field at the end. It was an inferior group of horses in that spot, but I thought that she showed finishing power that we hadn't seen from her last year. So I think Latruska is just really firing on all cylinders right now. And for my money, she's the real rival to She Dares the Devil.
Yeah, I would agree. I wasn't dismissing her. I just would prefer She Dares the Devil. The horse I don't get at all is Get Rid of What Ails You. Not that I don't get her, but I don't get the morning line on this one at 3-1, same as Latruska. She's the other Brad Cox in here, but she comes in way slower than basically everyone else in the field. So I suspect that one's a bad morning line. She's the one horse I would say isn't even really a contender for me. I know she's probably going to take some money just because it's Brad Cox, but those are never the horses I want to be on.
No, I do disagree with the morning line. I don't see how she's a point apart from She Dares the Devil. One of those Brad Cox trainees is going to take a lot more money than she is. I will say Get Rid of What Ails You last performance was very impressive. That was the short stretch at Oaklawn, and she passed about 9 horses in that short stretch. I mean, she was flying at the end of that race. It's just, this is a significantly tougher field, so it's a big step up in class for her. This might not be the right spot for her to win again. Moving on to the next stakes on this Saturday Oaklawn Park card. It's race 7, the ungraded but $500,000 Essex handicap. 7 horses signed on to go this mile and a 16th distance. And it's a pretty intriguing group of runners because we have horses coming in from a variety of different directions. You've got the Maryland shipper, Harper's First Ride, Tax coming in from Florida, and then you've got some local Oaklawn Park performers like Silver State and Night Ops who faced off last time. And Night Ops was actually the winner of this race last year, I believe. Yeah, he won the Essex Stakes back in 2020. So a very evenly matched, interesting group of runners where I think you can make a case for a lot of them.
Yeah, there are several here in here who I guess could win. I mean, it's just a really tough race. It's one where you definitely got to monitor the odds board because I have no idea what's going to happen. A couple I would lean to a little bit just based on what the morning line says. You know I'm a fan of Tax. I picked him last time, but he wound up being scratched. I do like that he's moving back to the 2 turns. I don't think there's a ton of speed in here. So I think he's one that has a good chance. It's not a race, even though it's an ungraded race. It does have a $500,000 purse, so I would have expected some horses that were a bit faster, to be honest. Tax comes in with a couple 120s, which is as good as anybody else in here. But the horse, as of now, just based on the odds, I prefer a little bit more to him is the horse that's Maryland-based, Harper's First Ride. I do believe he was a private sale since the last time. He's switching from Claudio Gonzalez barn to Robertino Diodoro, who does very well with first-time acquisitions. And frankly, I think you can just put a line through that Pegasus. I was a little dubious when they sent him to that race in the first place. He did no running at all, and it's the kind of running line I have to wonder if he's just a horse that really needs Lasix, because he had been so consistent up to that point that to just not show up at all doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I like that they're bringing him back pretty quickly to the races. He's getting that Lasix again. So if I had to make a top pick, I think Harper's First Ride is going to run, and maybe he'll run well, and maybe he'll be overlooked just because of that beaten 50 lengths running line while never being in the race last time.
Yeah, Harper's First Ride is a horse that I'm really not sure what to do with. He was actually, I believe, purchased prior to the Pegasus because he did race for these owners last time. I guess the plan, though, was always to take him to a different circuit and transfer him to Robertino Diodoro. Maybe the Lasix was the issue in the Pegasus last time. I'm not really sure about that. He is a horse that had done his best running in Maryland. That is where they primarily campaigned him. But he had run a little bit worse the few times that they had shipped him in the past. And it has happened a few times over the past few seasons. They tried a race at Monmouth last summer where he didn't show up. Going further back in his PPs, they'd even shipped him to Aqueduct once, and he put forth a pretty dismal effort. So I'm a little bit concerned that he is just one of those Maryland specialists. Hard to explain why that would be, that he loves those courses at Laurel and Pimlico so much, but we have seen that before from some horses that do show a high level of ability at those two tracks and run some big speed figures and can't transfer them elsewhere. So I'm a little bit concerned about that with Harper's First Ride, but I mean, there's no argument for me that if it was the Lasix coming off last time that did him in, he's got prior speed figures that would certainly beat this field. Craig, you know that I'm not the biggest fan of Tax, at least anymore. I just am a little bit concerned about his current form. I thought that he was helped by a speed bias too back when he won that Harlan's Holiday at Gulfstream. And aside from that, his form over the past year has just been a little spotty for me. They've been pretty choosy about where they run him. He's had a lot of layoff lines. I'm just not really sure where Tax stands at this point, though I do acknowledge that from a class standpoint, Tax has faced the best horses, and he's getting real class relief coming into this. So I wouldn't dismiss him. Just if he's among the shorter prices here, and if he does vie for favoritism, he's one that I might try to beat in this race. I mean, Silver State's the favorite on the morning line. I don't have a big problem with him. He ran okay last time to beat the very game Hunk of Burning Love in that fifth season. I don't think Hunk of Burning Love's really on the same level as these horses, but I suppose Silver State has more upside, given that he's just a lightly raced horse, and he's now making his fourth start off a layoff as a 4-year-old. It seems like Steve Asmussen's brought him along pretty steadily, moving him up from allowance races gradually into stakes company. I just get a little bit concerned about this horse stretching out further in distance because he's got a pedigree that says a mile is really supposed to be his limit. And the few times in the past that they've tried to stretch him out further, he really hasn't responded well to it. So I just worry that this horse has some distance limitations, but I suppose he's one you can consider. I'm going to try a long shot in this race. That's the number 6, Green Light Go. Maybe this horse is just completely finished and he's never going to get back to that impressive form that we saw from him when he was first unleashed as a 2-year-old. But I feel like this might be the right spot for this horse now that he's in the barn of Jerry Hollendorfer. It's a pretty interesting pairing of owner and trainer here. Hollendorfer training for Stronach Stables, who of course is run by Frank Stronach, not the owner of the Stronach racetracks. But Green Light Go, he is a horse that had shown so much talent as a juvenile, and the narrative back then was that he just didn't stretch out, but maybe he was asking a little bit too much too soon in that Champagne, and in retrospect, it was no disgrace losing to Tiz the Law in that spot. Turns out Tiz the Law was just a better horse as a 2-year-old, and Green Light Go, he did lose some of his early speed as a 3-year-old, and you could view his last race, that first start for Jerry Hollendorfer off the layoff, I guess one of two ways. Maybe you could say, oh, he just hasn't progressed at all, and that's a sign that he's just not a horse that's ever going to get back to what he was. But I'd be a little forgiving of that effort because it was a sloppy racetrack. He was outrun a little bit in the early going after sort of a flat-footed start. He was making good progress coming to the quarter pole, but his rider elected to stay inside and ended up losing momentum, kind of running into the back of some horses that were fading. He was glued to the rail over that muddy surface. It was not something that I usually love at Oaklawn Park, and he was still making up some ground at the end. I think this horse has potential to get back on track, and he's going to be a price in this race. So I'm going to take a flyer with Green Light Go.
Yeah, I have no problem with him at all. This race, obviously not at the Grade 1 level like the Santa Anita handicap, but it kind of reminds me of Maxfield last week in that Silver State is a favorite in here, but I'd argue he might be the fourth or fifth fastest horse. So I'm definitely going to try to beat him. Got no problem with Green Light Go. And I do think it's one where I'm really going to be paying close attention to the odds board because it's the kind of race where I just don't know where the bettors are going to go. But wherever they do, I'm probably going to go a little different direction, just trying to beat Silver State.
Moving on to the next stakes race on this Oaklawn Park card, that is race 9, the Temperance Hill, going 1.5 miles on the dirt. We don't see too many races in this marathon dirt division across the country, and this is one of the big ones, I suppose. Campaign, who is kind of a specialist in these sorts of races. He really needs every bit of ground. As far as they write races, that's what Campaign wants to do. I think it's very smart of his connections to target this race once again. He closed from way back to just missing this race last year over a sloppy track. He's coming back and is likely to get fast going this time, though he seems like a horse that handles any kind of going. I guess Campaign is the horse to beat, having gotten in that prep last time. I'll be honest, I saw the morning line for this race, and You're to Blame at 3-1. I don't get that at all. I don't even see how You're to Blame is much of a contender in this race. So I am expecting Campaign to be the favorite, and I suppose he is the horse to beat.
Yeah, I think he is. One thing I've learned over the years is I've been suckered into a lot of horses based on speed figures earned at much shorter distances. And it just never, ever seems to work out, especially when I bet horses like this. The two horses that have some good races at this longer distance are You're to Blame, who you mentioned earlier, and Campaign. And You're to Blame is one who just doesn't win enough. I mean, he's been in these races many times at 1.5 miles, 1 5/8, and he just always seems to find a way to lose. So I guess out of the two, I would prefer Campaign. I'll admittedly say I'm far from a specialist in these races. As a guy that makes speed figures are probably the races I like the least. So that said, I'll go with Campaign just because we talked about his rate. We mentioned him being in the Thunder Road. It was very obviously a prep race for something down the line, and this was the race. So that's who I'm going to go with, and I'm curious to hear who you came up with.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Campaign has this reputation as being sort of a difficult horse that doesn't show up a lot. But if you just isolate the races that he's run, going 1.25 miles and beyond on the dirt, he's actually very consistent. I know that he was pulled up in that marathon at the end of 2019, and we haven't seen him much since then. But if you throw out some of those other races where they were just prepping him, like last time on the turf, he usually runs well and is coming on at the end of these races. So I expect Campaign to run well in this spot, and I'd probably lean towards him as a top pick. I don't know what price we're going to get. I think anything lower than 5-2 would be too short on this horse, given his running style. You never want to take too short of a price on a horse that's such a plotter like this, who has to make up so much ground, but he is the horse to beat. I mean, you're right that You're to Blame does have prior form going this distance that will make him competitive here. It's just, it's form from so long ago, and this is a horse that was clearly sold by his prior connections. And Todd Pletcher used to train him. He made one start for Ron Moquette and the new owners last time out, going a shorter distance. And I mean, he didn't take any money that day. He was beaten by today's rival Plainsman pretty easily. I don't know. I don't see the appeal of You're to Blame in this spot, and I don't see why he'd be any kind of short price. So, I mean, the other horse that I think you have to consider is the number 1 Tenfold, because he does have prior speed figures that put him in the mix. The question for him is the 1.5 miles. He's run well going up to 1.25 miles on the dirt. That extra 1/4 mile, though, that could be an issue for him because he tried a longer distance in that race, Breeders' Cup week. The Thoroughbred After Carolines 3 back, and he didn't run so well that day. He did have some trouble early in the race, but he had his shot late and just didn't really see out the distance. So I'm a little bit concerned about Tenfold going this far. But the others, I mean, you could be concerned about a lot of them not getting this distance beyond Campaign and those two other horses I just talked about, because as you said, it's really hard to know who's going to appreciate this stretch out in distance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. If I had to make a second pick in here, I guess it would be Tenfold. Just because, as you said, he's run well at a mile and a quarter. He definitely runs better at the mile and 3/16 than a mile and a quarter than he does some of those shorter distances. But there is that race last year where he didn't do much running at all at a mile and 5/8. So I wish I had some more clever opinions at a price. But like I said, I've just been burned so many times trying to look at speed figures from shorter distances. And I know that's not the route to go. So I'm going to stick with the distance thing in here. And unfortunately, there's just not a whole lot of prices that have run good at the distance.
Yeah, I'll say just a few more horses to touch upon in this race. I mean, the horses that I think I don't want, that I think will be short prices, are the 4 Plainsmen, who I've never gotten the impression he wants to go this far. And I know he's got some recent figures that put him in the mix, and he did beat You're to Blame pretty easily last time. I just don't think this is the right spot for Plainsman. And the number 9, Lone Rock, who seems to be on a bit of a roll for Robertino Diodoro, he's another one that I just don't see wanting this distance, so I'd veer away from them. I mean, the 2 others that I guess I would use at prices are the 6 Treasure Trove, because, I mean, it's Mike Maker stretching out. Even on the dirt, this can be a nice angle for him. And he has tried this horse going longer before. He did it on the turf. He's not really a turf horse, so maybe it'll work on the dirt. He'll be a price in this race. And number 8, Split the Wickets. He's more of a turf horse, but he's tried the dirt a few times over the years, and his dirt races have generally been in line with the turf figures that he runs at the time, and that was pretty much the case the last time that he tried the dirt, that off the turf race at Churchill Downs from last fall. That effort's not going to win here, but he does have other races that put him in the mix and say that he belongs in stakes events. So I think he's a little bit interesting, and he figures to be a bit of a price in this race, but Campaign to me just seemed like by far the most reliable option. Moving on to race 10 at Oaklawn on Saturday. That is the Hot Springs, the race right before the Rebel. This is also a listed stakes event going 6 furlongs, and we've got the Hot Springs specialist in Whitmore, who also now, probably a more lofty title, is the Reigning Eclipse Award champion and reigning Breeders' Cup winner, as this 8-year-old comes back for another season. Just great to see horses like this, these older geldings, continue to come back and maintain their form at advanced ages, and Whitmore just seems to keep getting better with age.
Yeah, he's fun. I've seen him so many times at Oaklawn, I can't even count. I forget what his record is there. I think he's won, I'm looking it up now. He's won 9 times at Oaklawn Park already, so he's going for 10. Not sure how many horses have won that often at Oaklawn before, but I would imagine it's a very short list. So I'm excited to see him run, but that said, you know me, I'm going to take a shot against him. He is turned 8 now. I think it was probably one of the weaker Breeders' Cup sprints that we've seen in the history of the running, to be honest. I mean, he only ran I think it was a 119 or 120 raw speed figure. On my PPs, he's a little higher than that today because he is dropping 5 pounds off of that effort, so it shows up as a 122. But it's just, I'm not blown away by him or CZ Rocket, who was the runner-up in the sprint that day. I just don't think they have any kind of huge edge over the field. That said, it is a pretty weak field outside of those 2. My buddy Flagstaff's in here, but I always try to beat him. I'm not going to pick him today because I can't see him beating those 2. But the horse I'm going to go to is Boldor, I guess you say. He's a horse who we talked about the last time he ran. He didn't run a speed figure up with those other horses, but I definitely think there's more in the tank with him. I'm not saying he's a cinch or the most likely winner here, but I do think he's probably going to drift from those 5-1 morning line odds. I do think he's going to get some pace to run into, and I just think there's more in the tank for him with Steve Asmussen. Last time out, he got that 112 speed figure. He did it closing into a slow pace. It wasn't the strongest field, but he still wound up winning it pretty easily. So I'm going to take a shot with him. The one thing I don't like is somehow he is carrying 124 pounds. I noticed Marcus Hirsch, our DRF colleague, tweet this out that he's actually carrying more than the Breeders' Cup winner, which makes absolutely 0 sense. So I'm not a fan of him picking up all the weight, but I'm not a huge weight guy, so I'm still going to make Boldor my top pick.
I could go on a real rant about this. I think allowance condition weights in stakes races is the most ridiculous thing in horse racing. I don't understand why you would use allowance weights in a stakes race. I mean, to me, just bring back handicaps. It's so much worse to use arbitrary allowance weights. Either just make it weight for age or do a handicap. I don't get why that's taken hold and swept across the country as the weighting system in stakes races, but that's racing in the United States, I suppose. When I said that Whitmore was the hot spring specialist, I mean, he is a specialist at Oaklawn Park, but correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he's going for a 5th consecutive win in the hot spring stakes, which is just amazing. I mean,
yeah, I think that is correct.
Yeah, I can't recall a horse anywhere else in the country winning a stakes race 5 years in a row. I mean, I guess you might have to go back to Kelso. I don't really know. It's not something I can recall happening in recent memory with another horse. It's not a grade 1 event, but that's just really cool. And as you said, we had a very similar opinion of the Breeders' Cup Sprint last year. It was not the strongest field, and I personally penalized Whitmore a little bit in the Eclipse Award voting by giving somebody else the nod over him, though I was happy to see him win it. And I'm a fan of Whitmore. I think he's a really cool horse. In this race, it's not the toughest group of sprinters in the country, and his only real competition, in my view, is CZ Rocket. And I just think that Whitmore's a better horse than CZ Rocket. So I think Whitmore is likely to win his 5th consecutive Hot Spring Stakes. And I also think it's worth noting that if you're a little concerned about the pace of this race, do note the presence of the number 5 Fire Crow, who's also in here for Ron Moquet and is co-owned by Robert LaPenta, who owns Whitmore. So I would imagine this horse is kind of in here as a bit of a rabbit for Whitmore, just to ensure that he gets the pace that he needs, because winning this race is probably kind of important to him, to the connections. It's just a cool feat to achieve. So I think we're going to see a good version of Whitmore on Saturday, and I just think he's the right horse to take in this race over CZ Rocket. As for the horses coming out of the King Cotton, which you mentioned, Craig, which was won by Boldor, which I have to say again, you made a great pick on him last time, getting the job done at nearly 10-1. I'm just not sure about the quality of that race. Neither of us are the biggest fan of Flagstaff, and watching it back, even I have to admit, Flagstaff didn't get the best trip in there. He was kind of squeezed back in the early going, was much farther back than he's comfortable being, and he actually made a good run up the inside in the stretch on a day when you wanted to be on the outside. So I think you could make the argument just from a trip standpoint that Flagstaff was probably the best horse that day. I just can't pick Flagstaff as an alternative to Whitmore because he's not a horse that I ever really want to advocate for too much on the top. So I just think Whitmore is the right one, and I'd use him over Flagstaff underneath.
Yeah, I can see that. I just want to bring up, just in case people have forgot, what I think is really cool about Whitmore is he was a horse that was on the Kentucky Derby trail. He ran 2nd in the Rebel, 3rd in the Arkansas Derby. He lost in that race to Creator, who I think went on to win the Belmont, if memory serves. And he even ran in Nyquist Kentucky Derby. Now, granted, he didn't run very well, but the fact that horse was able to rebound from that, cut back the sprints, and just have such a long career is really cool, and a reason I'll always root for this guy.
Moving on to the feature race at Oaklawn Park on Saturday. That is race 11, the Grade 2 Rebel. This Kentucky Derby prep offering 50 qualifying points to the winner. Going a mile and a 16th, a $1 million purse on the line. 8 horses signed up. We've got 2 that are likely to vie for favoritism in the Brad Cox-trained Caddo River and the Bob Baffert-trained Concert Tour. Both of these horses have some significant questions to answer. They both also have quite a bit of speed, and that could affect the pace of this race and maybe set it up for somebody else.
Yeah, for sure. It's a tough race. It's a race with where I definitely want to take a shot against the favorite. I'll just come right out and say that Caddo River's a horse who's won his last 2 races by almost 20 combined lengths, but he is not run very fast at all. He got back-to-back 106 speed figures for those efforts. I don't think he's particularly been flattered by any of the run backs from those races. So he's the kind of favorite that I personally am always looking to beat. I guess the logical alternative would be Concert Tour. He ships into Oaklawn for Bob Baffert. We all know he wins plenty of times doing that. But he is trying 2 turns for the first time. He does have better speed figures than the rest of the field, but I am a little leery. I mean, he beat Freedom Fighter last time. That one ran in the Gotham, was it last week at Aqueduct? Not very well. He ran a 4th that just wasn't very good. So I don't want any parts of him at a short price either. The other horse who I assume is going to take some money is Keep Me in Mind. He was third in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, came from way back to get third, closing into a super fast pace. He's a deep closer, so I'm never going to be a fan of those kind unless I just think a meltdown is coming. And while the pace projector says the pace is going to be fast, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, I don't think this is the kind of race that's going to set up very well for Keep Me in Mind. So if I have to make a top pick in here, I'm going to go with a bigger price horse, and that's more toward the inside with Big Lake for Steve Asmussen. I just really liked his last allowance race. He was wide all the way around the track. He lost some ground. The pace was pretty quick, and he just kept on coming. It was at the fairgrounds. I can't remember if I said that or not, but I just liked what I saw visually from him. He ran a 107 speed figure, which is actually a point higher than what the favorite has. And this just feels like a race where I want to take a shot against the favorites, and he's the one I landed on.
Yeah, we agree that if you do want to take a shot against the favorites, that Big Lake is probably the most interesting price horse in here. I should clarify, I don't want to take a shot against the favorites, but I would use Big Lake in exotics if I was going to use another long shot in this race, because we agree about his last race. It was pretty impressive. The top two had real separation on the rest. I do think the runner-up out of that race is the better horse, Defeater, a Tom Amos trainee, who I guess we might see in the Louisiana Derby. He got a trip from way, way back and made up a ton of ground at the end. It wasn't like Big Lake was stopping. That horse was just eating into his margin at the very end of the race. But Big Lake for Asmussen, I think he's the one out of that barn that you certainly want in this race, even though he's a bigger price on the morning line. Though I do like the favorites in this race. I have a different take on Caddo River than you, Craig. I know that he hasn't run particularly fast speed figures yet, and typically I talk myself off a horse like this based solely on that, but I think his last couple have been subtly better efforts than they might appear. He's at a pretty quick pace too back at Churchill when he won that maiden race. That was a race that completely fell apart behind him. I mean, he won by 10 lengths. He wasn't beating anything, but I just loved the way he did it. And last time out in the Smarty Jones, well, again, it wasn't a strong field. That's a race that actually has been flattered by runbacks. I mean, Cowan came back, and who knows what to make of the Saudi Derby, but he nearly won that race. The fourth place finisher, Moonlight Strike, who was beaten 17 lengths by Caddo River, he came back last week and was third in the Tampa Bay Derby, improving his TimeformUS speed figure by 19 points. The last two finishers across the line in the Smarty Jones, they both came back to improve by huge margins in their TimeformUS speed figures next time, obviously dropping in class, and they were no match for Caddo River, but I'm not going to indict Caddo River based on the low speed figure last time, because, I mean, what was he supposed to do? Win by 20 lengths? I think he did what he had to do in that race. And there is the question about whether he's capable of taking that step forward from a speed figure standpoint. But I go back to his second race when he was so impressive, losing a maiden race at Belmont Park, but running the best race that day when he set a super fast pace and just got run down by Speaker's Corner, who I don't know what's happened to him. He looked like such a talented Bill Mott horse, but even attending that fast pace, he still held off Greatest Honor at the end of that race. That was just such a strong group of 2-year-olds, and Greatest Honors come out of that to blossom into one of the best 3-year-olds out there. And I think Caddo River still has it in him to take that big step forward. And I like him more than Concert Tour, who does come in with more speed figure power, but I've got real questions about Concert Tour stretching out in distance. I just get the sense watching this horse that he's more of a one-turn type. His pedigree, it could go either way. He's by street sense. The dam really didn't want to go much farther than a mile. And I didn't love the way he was finishing off that San Vicente last time. I mean, Freedom Fighter was game battling back inside of him, but I didn't see Concert Tour finishing up like he's supposed to relish 2 turns. I've watched some of his workouts since then, and the workouts can be very telling on a Bob Baffert horse. And while he's reeled in his workmates, he does it like a sprinter would, with a big turn of foot, and then he doesn't really gallop out the way that you like to see some of those Bob Baffert distance horses gallop out. So I'm a little skeptical of Concert Tour. Keep me in mind, I mean, he's going to get the right pace scenario. I liked his Breeders' Cup Juvenile well enough. He ran a 111 that day. That puts him in the mix. He got a great pace setup, but at least he has that one speed figure that puts him in the conversation. And I'm not going to hold his speed figure regression in the Kentucky Jockey Club against him too much, because closers are always at the mercy of pace and competition, and they didn't ride Keep Me in Mind to win that race by 5 lengths. They reserved him back in last until they got into the stretch and he ran the field down. So I think Keep Me in Mind is capable of better. I just prefer Caddo River and think Caddo River's shown more brilliance so far.
Yeah, you make a good point about Keep Me in Mind speed figure. He only ran a 99. But what you say with deep closers is true. That was a terrible field. I posted a stat on Twitter that the run backs from that race have been 0 for 11. And it's not just that. The speed figures, if you look at the average speed figure the horses have run since, it actually comes out to a 0. And these are horses that should be improving. So it was just a weak field. I think he's going to run fine. He just isn't one of my favorites. I just wanted to touch a little bit on the maiden race you talked about with Caddo River when he lost the Speaker's Corner. If you ever want to see what a strong maiden race looks like, if you have the opportunity to browse through our chart from that race, where you can scroll forward and see all the races, all the horses in the field have run back. It's just, that's what I would call a key race. It doesn't necessarily mean all the horses have to win the next time out, but there's a lot of improved speed figures, a lot of much better form going forward. So just something to keep an eye out when you see these maiden races, when you start seeing those kind of run backs, it often pays to follow them.
Switch gears and move out west over to Santa Anita, where they don't have quite the number of stakes races at Oaklawn Park, but they have 2 very interesting graded stakes as the features on their card, beginning with the Grade 3 San Simeon, which is race 7 at Santa Anita on Saturday. This is a pretty intriguing turf sprint because you've got a horse who I figure is going to be favored in the mare, Jolie Olympica, who's facing males for the first time in this country. And I'm not really sure that I trust her to get it done based on how she ran last time. And beyond her, you've got a lot of older males in this turf sprint division that aren't necessarily consistent or a little bit hard to trust.
Yeah, I think this is a pretty wide open race. I'm like you, I don't trust Jolie Olympica. Far be it for me to tell Richard Mandella what to do. I mean, the guy's, I assume he's a Hall of Fame trainer. But I think she's a horse who's better going longer and probably around, a mile and a 16th. The speed figures say she is. And I just think she would do fine in those races. But he keeps running her in these sprint races, and she's always usually a short price. And she doesn't win that often. She runs well, but she just doesn't win a lot of the time. So I'm going to take a shot against her, against the boys in here. And the one I'm going to go to is Sistron. He's a horse who I've done well with in the past. He seems to handle dirt and turf. He is coming off a long layoff, but he's done that in the past. In fact, he did it just last year to win this very race by a head at 4-1 it was. And he beat a very good horse that day in Bound for Nowhere, who doesn't show up often, but when he does, he usually brings his running shoes. So something must have went wrong in May. He came back, didn't run well. Each showed speed, beaten a couple lengths, and has been unsighted since. But he's the horse I trust most in here. He's run more than a few 120 plus TimeformUS speed figures. And personally, I think he's probably the horse to beat. A couple others in here. I see Bob and Jackie is turning back. He actually hasn't sprinted since his debut. When he went down the hill, he ran a decent second that day. But if this was down the hill, I would like Bob and Jackie a lot more than I do in this spot, because these 6 furlong races, 6.5 furlong races out of the new Santa Anita chute are more like traditional sprints than what the down the hill races were. So I think he's got his work cut out for him. And the other horse I don't particularly care for, who is 7-2 on the morning line, same as Sistron, is Gregorian Chant. And he's a horse who just isn't fast enough. I get he won over this course last time out, but it was a much weaker field. Sometimes people get fascinated by the big closing move he made that day, but I think he's really got his work cut out for him here.
Yeah, this is one of those races where I could make a better case for the horses that I don't like than the horses that I do, especially among the shorter prices. We have a similar take on Jolie Olympica. I haven't been that thrilled with her turf sprints, and I haven't been especially that thrilled with her recent form. Last time out, I know she got beat by Charmaine's Mia, who it turns out is just a different horse since coming to Southern California, so maybe that's no disgrace that she lost that race at a relatively short price. But I talked about this when we handicapped the Las Cienegas last time, that I didn't I didn't love the way Jolie Olympica was working into that race, and I remember how impressive she looked in the morning last year, and I watched some of her workouts in XPTV coming into this race, and she's got that fast 46 drill last time, but she was ridden really hard to achieve that time, and to me, she's had some time off. It just seems like maybe she's not the same horse anymore, and they're trying a pretty tough spot here. It's just a grade 3, but there are some good horses in this race, so if she's a short price, and I feel like she could get bet down even more off that 3-1 morning line, she's not for me in this race. I agree with you, Craig, that the horse to beat is probably Sistron because he's got form going back a number of seasons that makes him really tough in this race. He's run, I think, even in this exact race in the past and finished second. My one problem with Sistron is I think he's a little better on the dirt. I mean, he's run plenty of turf races that put him in the mix here, and he's won 3 of 21 on the turf. But I think we've even talked about this on the Pacecast before, probably after he won the Bing Crosby back in 2019. I wonder why they haven't tried the dirt more with this horse, because it seems like he has just a little bit more brilliance on the dirt, and they usually stick to the turf with him. Maybe it's a little easier on a horse like him. It seems like sometimes they have trouble keeping him sound, so maybe the turf is a kinder surface for Sistron, but I do think he's the horse to beat in this spot, and there's not a ton of pace signed on, so I suppose he's supposed to get the right trip. I'm not against him by any means. The others that are more route types, I mean, most of them who are shorter prices, I'm against. Bob and Jackie and Sombier, they're not the kind of turnbacks that I like. Gregorian Chant, who's a short price on the morning line, as you said, he's the same price as Sistron. I don't get that at all. I know he won going this distance in the Clocker's Corner last time. Go and look up that field. It was not nearly as good as this one. I know that him winning on the turn back might give hope to some people that want to like Bob and Jackie and Sombier in this spot, but those turnbacks don't always work out. And if you're going to try a turnback like that, you should at least do so with a price. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to swing for the fences in this race and try for a very big price in the morning line and a horse that might even go up from that. And that's the number 1, Barristan the Bold. This horse is coming off a pretty long layoff. He hasn't been seen since January of 2020, but it's worth going back and watching this horse's 2 races in the United States. They were both going a mile, and he ran deceptively well in both of those starts. In the Mathis Brothers mile, when he made his U.S. debut back at the end of 2019, I mean, he wasn't quite any match for Mo Forza that day, but he swung very wide coming into the stretch of that race, lost some momentum doing that, and finished up well. And then last time out, that was just an allowance field, but a pretty good one. Originaire was second in there. He's a graded stakes performer, and Barristan the Bold was arguably one of the best horses in that race because he was extremely wide around the second turn trying to make a 4-wide move. This horse's California form is deceptively strong. The big questions obviously are, can he sprint and can he handle coming off the layoff and run a top race? I don't know the answers to either of those questions, but he does have form from Europe where he was able to handle 7 furlongs, so maybe turning back and going shorter is better for him. And he's this big tank of a horse, and I've watched some of his workouts on XBTV. It looks like he's fit coming back for this race, and I just don't love anybody else at shorter prices, and he's going to be a really big price, and I'm somewhat interested in him, so I'll go for Barristan the Bold on top.
Yeah, I like the point you make there. I like hearing maybes and things like that with a 15-1 shot on the morning line because that's what you're going to get. You're not going to get a 15-1 shot where you love everything. If things were obvious, he'd be 5-2 or 7-2 or somewhere in that nature. So good. I like it. And the one thing I would point out about him is he hasn't run since he was just a barely turned 4-year-old. And even then he was running speed figures around the 115 range. So if he's developed into a fully mature horse at 5, there's no reason he couldn't run in the 120s here.
The feature race on Saturday at Santa Anita, and the final race we're going to discuss on this TimeformUS Forecast, is the Grade 1 Beholder Mile, going 1 mile on the dirt course at Santa Anita, and this race does feature the return of last year's 3-year-old filly champion and last year's Preakness Stakes winner, the number 1 Swiss Skydiver. It's great to see her back in action. She's a horse who had a busy and productive 3-year-old campaign, as Ken McPeak seemed to run her just about every month, and she really thrived on that racing action. We haven't seen her come off the layoff, I think, at any point in her career. Basically, she just kept running every month since they began her career as a 2-year-old, so I think the layoff's a bit of a question for her, and this is also not the softest field in the world for a comeback. There are some good rivals in here.
Yeah, it is. And you bring up my one point that I'm a little bit leery of, and that's the layoff. As somebody that's followed this game for a long time, I've seen many a filly and mare that had really, really good campaigns. They rest, they finally get a break, and they come back, and they just don't seem interested anymore. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here, but at a short price, I do think it's something you have to consider. Well, I mean, we've seen horses like Monomoy Girl who do just great and keep on going. So it's certainly not something that's cut and dried. But as you said, this is a really tough field. She's not going to have any cakewalk. She draws the inside, which I think is going to be tough given some of the horses in here. And a couple I think you have to talk about. I'll start with Harvest Moon. She was a horse I really liked their Breeders' Cup Distaff. She had been on a tear. I think she'd won 4 or 5 races in a row going in, won them mostly really easy. I didn't like her that day, but I wound up liking her coming out of it because I thought she ran well. She pressed a quick pace that day. She was fourth, beaten 2 lengths, but I thought it was a really good effort from her. She got a 122 speed figure, which puts her right there with most of Swiss Skydivers' efforts. So I have no knocks on her. I really wanted to like her as well, but there's a horse I like even more in here, and that's the 4-horse Sanus. I really liked her last effort. She got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure when she tracked what was a really fast pace. I mean, you could argue it was kind of a perfect trip, but she did quite a bit of running to stay with those 150 plus TimeformUS pace figures early, and she just drew away and blitzed the field in the La Cañada. So I think she's sitting on a big effort. She was one of those shippers coming in from South America. She's improved her TimeformUS speed figure every time out, and I just think she's sitting on another really big race. So she will be my top pick in here. I do like Harvest Moon. I have no knocks on Swiss Skydiver at all, other than the price. I don't think she's going to be that 8-5 morning line. Probably more like a 6-5 shot in here. The one horse I don't want is the Bob Baffert trained as time goes by. She's only 4-1 on the morning line, but she's coming out of romping wins, but only in a maiden and allowance win. The last time was the first time around 2 turns. She's probably going to want to be up near the pace, and I just think that's going to be a little bit too big of a jump in here for me.
This is a really interesting race to handicap, and we agree about some things and disagree about others. I think we have a similar take on Swiss Skydiver. At a very short price, I have the same concerns that you do about the layoff. Look, I'd love to see her do well. She's such an easy horse to root for because she runs all the time. They take on the big boys with her, and she typically runs well. I'd love to see her do well in here. She's just not the kind of horse that I would advocate betting on at a short price, especially given that rail draw. There are 2 horses in here that I think are very dangerous. And actually, if I was making ordinal picks, I would put Swiss Skydiver third behind these 2 horses. One of them is Harvest Moon, who I agree with everything you said. She ran really well in the Breeders' Cup Distaff. That was a game performance to lose to Monomoy Girl by just 2.5 lengths. And she had upside coming into that race. And I think even comes out of it with upside as she makes her 4-year-old debut, given that she's still very lightly raced. If you watch her workouts coming into this, Simon Callahan's not the kind of trainer that pushes his horses in the morning, but she's been achieving some nice times and doing it very easily. She just looks like she's really thriving coming into this race. So I think Harvest Moon is very dangerous and in some ways the horse to beat, given her California home base and all that. So I think she's a horse you really want to take seriously in this spot. We don't have quite the same view of Sinenius. I agree about her last race in that she ran much better than her competition. I just think that La Cañada was a really weak race for the level. We had talked about some of the horses that also ran in the Bayacoa prior to that at Los Alamitos and came back for the La Cañada. It just wasn't a good group, especially when you consider that horses like Fighting Mad and Hard Not to Love have really gone the wrong way, and those were her 2 rivals in that race. And the others, the Miss Stormy D's of the world, they're just not nearly grade 1 quality. So while Sinenos did earn a nice speed figure last time, I'm just a little bit concerned that she's not going to class up with these. And the other horse that I like, which Craig and I have completely different opinions about, is the 6 as time goes by, the Bob Baffert horse. Or I should say the other Bob Baffert horse. I think this horse is going to be really dangerous in this spot, and she would actually be my top pick in this race. I think this horse is really talented. I know that she hasn't quite done it from a speed figure standpoint yet, and you're kind of taking her on the come, and she's not going to be any kind of huge price in this race. She will certainly be the shorter of the two Bob Baffert trainees, Golden Principle being the other one. But she just looked to me at the start of her career like a horse that really wanted no part of sprinting. She's got a pedigree that says the longer the better, being by American Pharaoh, out of that excellent race mare Take Charge Lady, who's also been a wonderful brood mare producing horses like Will Take Charge and Take Charge Indy. And as time goes by, seems like one of these horses for Bob Baffert that took a little while to come along. He ran her through those sprint races, as he typically does with the good ones. And when it was time to stretch her out, he did so. And based on her last performance, she was ready to stretch out, because I know it says that cleared, ridden out in the chart comment, and you should go watch that race, everybody, because she won by 9 lengths like it could have been 20. I mean, she was asked for nothing at the end of that race by Joel Rosario, galloping away with this big stride on her. I know she's going to have to run faster than that 115 to get it done here, but I like the way that she's worked since then. In her last workout, even being the router type that she is, she outworked that fast Bob Baffert horse Axeman in the morning. I just think this horse is the real deal, and I don't know what kind of price we're going to get on her, but if she's around that 4-1, I think that's probably fair, and I think as time goes by, is going to put up a big effort in this Beholder Mile.
All right, now we'll point out, you sold me. I'm going to go watch it again and take a look. While you were talking, I was looking at the chart, and it is interesting to note of the 3 horses who have run back from that race. 2 of them won, including the last place finisher, Page Runner, with an improved speed figure. This T won with a slightly lower speed figure, but after getting drubbed pretty decisively, it's interesting that both of those 2 came back to win races.
Yeah, this T is actually in this race, believe it or not. I mean, I don't know why they're taking a shot at a grade 1. And you can see she was actually a maiden when she finished second to as time goes by. So that was not a good field that as time goes by was beating, even though some horses did run back to do okay out of it. It was nowhere near grade 1 quality. Just sometimes you watch a horse and the way they move and they just exude quality, and you get a feeling that this horse is, there's just something special about them. And you get that. I personally get that feeling watching as time goes by. So we'll see what she does in this race. Obviously, Mike Smith hopped off the other one to ride here, so that's a good sign for Bob Baffert. And it'll be interesting to see what happens, because there's a lot of intrigue in this Beholder Mile. It could go a bunch of different ways, and Swiss Skydiver, clearly the horse to beat, just not sure she's one that you want to bet on.
Yeah, you mentioned Mike Smith. That is something that gives me a little pause, because I'm wondering how he's going to ride this horse. Most of these Bob Baffert horses, he likes to take them right to the front, or else maybe. I'm just curious what we're going to get out of him. It should be interesting. I think it's going to be a fascinating tactical race to see how some of these horses ride, because they all seem to have pretty good tactical speed. I mean, we've seen Swiss Skydiver has done her best running up near the front. Harvest Moon's been up near the front, but none of them are particularly speed horses. So if I were going to make a TimeformUS pace projector just based on my visuals, I'd almost guess that as time goes by is going to be in front, even though we have her shown back in 5th.
Yeah, especially from that outside post position. I'd imagine that Mike Smith is going to come out for position and let her roll away from there. And speaking of the pace projector, I don't want to harp on it and knock a favorite too much that I have a great deal of respect for, but the horse that I would be most concerned about looking at this pace projector is Swiss Skydiver, because as you said, she does her best racing up on the front end, and there's a lot of speed in this race, and breaking from the rail, she could find herself taking a lot of kickback early, and she hasn't always responded well to that. So I'm just some little things to be concerned about with Swiss Skydiver. Well, great show, Craig. A lot to discuss in these races. Some favorites to take shots against. A lot of good horses on display. I hope you have a nice time enjoying the Rebel if you do make it out to Oaklawn on Saturday. Just a lot to look forward to this weekend at both of these venues.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Haven't seen live racing since, I want to say, Springboard Mile Day, maybe. So it's been quite some time for me, and looking forward to getting out, seeing some people that I know, and should be a great time, even if it rains, which it usually does, but hopefully it won't. So we're holding out for that.
Yeah, it looks like that forecast has brightened up a little bit, at least for Saturday. Might get some rain Sunday, but hopefully things are bright and sunny for that Rebel card. Well, that's all the handicapping for this week's show. We'll obviously recap all of these races when we record the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday. That should be a lot of fun to see how these horses come out of the weekend. Hopefully we gave out some good handicapping opinions. And remember that you can always listen to both of these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, or SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to that Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and make sure to stay tuned for that TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday.